Hello, this is Todd Gustafson with Cool Pool People with this week's pool tip. We're going to show you how to install a Polaris 280 right out of the box. What you want to do is, for at least a few hours, if not a day or two, stretch out the hose in the sun and stretch out the tail, because they come in the box all wound up, and if you just throw it straight into the pool, they're going to stay wound up and it's going to get all knotted up. So first step, stretch it out, let it get some sun, let things get as straight as possible. Next step, we're going to start measuring the depth and the length and the width of the pool and relate that to this hose. There's going to be 3 cuts that we make, and then there's going to be some parts that we join together and some areas that we lube so that it'll function better in the future. So stay tuned. All right, now what we're going to do is work on the Polaris itself and get it ready to put into the pool. The first thing I would do is make sure that this head float is a full thumb width away. That just provides the right balance. The next part is this tail flow adjustment. Go ahead and unscrew that all the way out. I just apply a little bit of silicone lube to that so that if you need to adjust it in the future, you'll be able to easily do it basically with your fingers. So put that in. Make sure that you've got the hose attachment nut up here. Get the bag ready to go. And we're ready for the next step. All right, the next step would be to attach the hose to the Polaris. And again, a little bit of lube is a good idea right here. And I'm going to show you one little trick that we do to help keep the bag from getting stuck in the wheels. We actually come back here, take off one of these, and attach it to the hose. Now that, when we put the clip on, that won't allow it to drop all the way down. Now the bag can't get into the wheels. Okay, so our next step is going to be to throw this into the pool, and you want to get it into the deepest spot, and we're going to measure the depth of the pool for our first cut. Go. All right, our next step is to see what the depth of the water is. Once that Polaris reaches the bottom, we'll pull that back out. So we want to find the deepest spot of the pool. We're going to make our first cut. It's going to be right here. So from the Polaris to this point is where we'll have our first swivel. And this section of hose is called the leader hose. It starts with the Polaris, goes to the first swivel. That's the hose that goes under the water and allows the Polaris to maneuver. The next 2 pieces of hose are going to float on top of the water, and you want to keep them untangled, and that's a different style of hose. So the first cut is going to be from the Polaris to the first swivel, and you're going to be using leader hose. All right. So the depth was about right here, and just from experience, I know if you're that close to the backup valve, it just doesn't function that well. So I'm going to add about 1 foot. I'm also going to slide this hose float down right on top of the backup valve. That helps to keep that backup valve buoyant. So we're going to make a cut right here. Boom. Now, so this is all waste. This is if you had a deep, like diving pool, you would need that. Some people just take a Polaris right out of the box and throw it in the pool and assume it's ready to go. But if you take the time to cut it properly, it's going to function a lot better. Tighten this one. Sometimes, yep, from the factory, they're not always tight. So just take a moment to tighten all of these. There we go. Now we're ready to cut the next 2 lengths of hose. You want those to end up the same length to one another. So we're going to stretch this out to the farthest point right now. Okay, we found the farthest point from the connection point. to this corner is going to be the farthest point. And a little interesting thing on this pool, they've got this really shallow sun deck area that we don't want the Polaris to try to get up on. So normally I would take the farthest point and move the Polaris back behind the coping, and I'm going to move it in front of the coping, again, just to keep it shorter so that it doesn't constantly try to climb and get stuck on that sun deck. And then we're going to go back to that point, and all of that leftover hose is the length that we need to get rid of, but we can't just cut it there. We need to measure that length, divide it by 2, and we're going to equally cut that distance out of 2 different hoses so that it performs a lot better. So we'll walk down this one. And just measure. Just find something of length that you can use to measure. All right, 7 lengths divided by 2, 3.5 lengths. So we're going to start at that swivel and cut off 3.5 lengths that way, and then 3.5 lengths this way. So that'll be our next step. All right, so we've already cut the depth of the water for the leader hose to that first swivel. We go down to find the second swivel right here. And this is where we're going to cut 3.5 lengths that way, 3.5 lengths that way, for a total of 7. And that will get the entire length the right amount. And these final 2 hoses will be of the same length to one another, if that makes sense. So 1, 2, 3 and a half. That is where we'll make that first cut. Three and a half. Second cut. Always make sure when you install the swivel, you look for the arrow and you make sure that it's pointing. Where is that arrow? There it is. I don't know if you can see that arrow. Make sure that arrow is pointing towards the Polaris, or in other words, in the flow of the water, the direction of the flow of the water. Go. Now we're ready for the next. All right, the next step is to remove the pressure relief valve, PRV, pressure relief valve, from the universal wall fitting, the UWF. So that's this piece right here with a spring inside of it that's designed to pop out if too much pressure gets on there. But you want to be able to adjust this throughout the life of the Polaris, so if you lube it, you'll be able to reach down and hand tighten or hand loosen it. If not, you'll have to be using a tool. Then this is the wall fitting portion of the universal wall fitting. That comes off. You don't really need to lube the inside because you want it to stay attached. But you do want to lube the outside threads because we're going to thread this into the wall of the pool. And there's going to be a lot of vibration on this over the life of this Polaris, and it will actually vibrate, and this plastic will, in essence, weld itself to the pool wall, or to the plastic in the pool wall. And it's very hard to get out. Then you got to shatter it and cut it. But if you lube it, it'll just untwist. So much easier. Something to note here, this is called the restrictor plate. That's just designed to have a small flow instead of this large amount of flow, so that if you ever take the Polaris out, there's some restriction against this for the pump, so that it's not just shooting out full speed. It has a little restriction. That way the booster pump doesn't burn up. So yeah, make sure you've got a restrictor plate on there. Make sure this is lubed up, and then we can go ahead and put that right in the wall. That's the next step. So I'm gonna go shut off the pump because there's too much of a jet to put that in. All right, next step is to put the wall fitting into the wall. Sometimes it helps to rotate it lefty-loosey for a little bit and then start going righty-tighty. Then this is the quick release. You just put it in a quarter of a turn and it's in place. But I'm going to use that to continue to screw in the wall fitting. There we go. And actually, all that's left now is to put the Polaris into the pool. Ta-da! A wonderfully working Polaris.